Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu dedicated his life to the fight for the liberation of the people in South Africa. Tributes continue to pour in from around the world. Let's look at his legacy with Father Michael Lapsley, founder of the Institute for Healing of Memories, of which the Arch was a patron. Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, a former commissioner at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Reverend Storey, who led the South African Council of Churches with the late Archbishop. Good evening to you all, and thank you so much for your time this evening. I'll begin with you, Reverend Storey. I was reading somewhere, and it was really quite a poignant opening to an article talking about how it is so ironic, but at the same time fitting for the Arch to pass away as South Africa marks the Day of Goodwill, something that he clearly stood for.
Well, I think he stood for so much more than just goodwill. I think something came from deep within him, which was rooted in his faith and in his understanding of two, I think, profoundly important values. The one was the value of love and compassion as we discover it in the New Testament and, in fact, in all the great religions, to which he was completely committed without any reserve. And the other was the concept of Ubuntu, which came out of his own culture and the culture of Black South Africa. And so there was this marriage of his faith and his heritage. And he was the most amazing and articulate advocate for those two values as the key to human relationships and indeed to the resolving of the kind of deep divisions we had not only in South Africa but which exist across the world.
And Father Lapsley, one of the things that has been coming out this afternoon, listening to different people who have been talking, is that his is a story that has got so many layers of good with it. Others are talking of humility. Others talk about a servant, strength, resilient. They talk about a man who stood for truth, a man who stood for justice. I wonder, what are some of your reflections tonight?
Well, like the rest of the nation and the rest of the world, there are many layers and dimensions to my own memories and reflections upon him. Obviously a champion, the voice of the people of South Africa as we struggled for justice, articulating our deepest hopes and desires of a people to be free. But I think we also need to think about the post-1994 Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I think of the leadership of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where unfortunately our democratic government has done very poorly in terms of implementing what that TRC stood for, particularly with lack of prosecutions of apartheid-era criminals, but also his commitment to the place of women in the church and the champion of that. And then going on further and saying, I'm not sure that I want to go to heaven if the LGBTIQIA+ are not there. And not being very popular for that, but then even going further and saying, I think he wrote a book saying that was it Jesus was not a Christian or God was not a Christian? Because it spoke to his moral and spiritual vision of the human family, that we are all God's children and of equal value. So many dimensions that I would want to remember tonight, but also remember a very close relationship, both in the years of the struggle, but in the years since. And of course, he was patron of the Institute for Healing of Memories. In a way, we were carrying forward the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, inspired by his view that all human beings are spiritual, all human beings have equal value, whether or not they be religious.
And Dr. Ntsebeza, one of the things that we're also seeing tonight, as Father Father Lapsley is also talking about the work that was done by the TRC at the time. Some this afternoon are actually saying that he may have been somewhat lenient on the proponents of apartheid. At the same time, others are saying that at the time, those who may have been seen as conservative in the church were saying that he was too outspoken against apartheid at the time. Talk to us about the work that you then did with him in the TRC, and also, responding to those who are saying that he was really quite lenient on those he should have been firm on.
Well, let me presage my remarks by completing what Father Lapsley had introduced, the quotation from Desmond Tutu: God is not a Christian. God accepts as pleasing those who live by the best lights available to them that they can discern. All truth, all sense of beauty, all awareness of goodness has one source, God, who's not confined to one place, time, or people. That was Desmond Tutu.
Ntsebeza, are you still there? All right, it looks like we might be having a challenge with Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza's line. We're going to try and re-establish a better line with him. Now, Reverend Storey, one of the things that was quite evident, and it still is to this day, was that he made sure that there was no separation of church and politics, because some, even today, still hold the view that the church has no place in politics, but he used his stature, within the church and also society to really fight in the struggle for liberation.
Yes, and I think this absurd idea that the church should not be involved in the issues of what is happening on our planet. My father used to say that everything begins in theology and ends in politics. And that is the truth, because if we have a faith and it doesn't, in the end, issue in the way in which we behave as communities and societies and nations, then it's a meaningless faith. It's empty of any use to humanity or to God. And Desmond Tutu made it utterly clear that the Bible, which is the book that guides him and guided him as a Christian, was fundamentally about justice and compassion in community. It was not so much about getting people to heaven as to bringing the values of heaven to earth. And so we used to say very clearly at the time, when we were engaging with a government which kept on suggesting we should keep out of politics, we were saying, we're not interfering with politics. You are interfering with God's children, with God's creation, with people who are precious in the sight of God. You are the trespassers, not us. You are the ones who have to withdraw your cruelty from the way it is touching the lives of people. And Desmond was an absolute master at being able to articulate very, very clearly the justifiable place of the church in the public square. The important thing about that presence, however, is that he was not a party man, that he could come into the public square and he could hold accountable whatever political party or movement, because he himself was not prisoner of any ideology. He was a biblical prophet. He was not any political party's mascot. And that's what gave his declarations such power and weight. They were not in any way compromised by the fact that he might belong to anybody or any group, except the truth.
And Advocate Ntsebeza, what do you say, because you're somebody who has worked with him in the TRC, and before we got cut off, I was asking, what do you say to the critics who say that he was quite, easy. He let off those that should have paid the price for the apartheid atrocities. He let them off the hook quite easily.
So I just want to understand in what way anyone can say Tutu or Archbishop Tutu let off people too easily. Because I don't know what they seek to mean by that. Tutu was no authority to let off anyone off the hook, but in his capacity as chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he made himself very clear as to where he stood. In fact, I differ with those who say Desmond Tutu did not condemn the armed struggle. Desmond Tutu was very supportive of the liberation movement, but he clearly did not support the armed struggle as part thereof. He was out and out a person who was for peaceful methods being used to liberate ourselves. And in fact, when the apartheid government started to seek to put him in conflict with the liberation movement, which was supportive of the armed struggle, in fact, was engaged in the armed struggle, he shocked them by being one of the most ardent supporters of the sanctions, economic sanctions against South Africa. And it is, in fact, the biting of the economic sanctions that brought the apartheid order to its knees. So here is a man who, on the one hand, says, look, my commitment to peaceful means to bring about change, even radical and fundamental change, do not allow me to support armed struggle. Because I'm a person who believes in using every peaceful method to obtain, change in this country. But I will support the sanctions regime to the hilt, because that is the most non-violent but effective way of bringing about the demise of the apartheid order.
Advocate Ntsebeza, pardon me, before I go back to Father Lapsley, I'd like to really touch on what you're talking about, especially his work. We saw him during the TRC break down publicly, during some of the most difficult testimonies to hear on some of the atrocities that have happened and also happened during apartheid. I wonder what would be the conversations that take place away from the cameras, away from members of the public, when you are talking to him post these moments behind closed doors as commissioners?
I think the Tutu behind closed doors was not different to the Tutu in the front. There was, a Tutu who can break down in front of the nation is the same Tutu who has great tenderness. And I personally experienced that tenderness in my own journey. But I think also when this question that you asked my brother Advocate Dumisa about being not hard on people, again, the TRC deal was that if you were a perpetrator, you would get amnesty. And if you didn't get amnesty and chose not to come forward, then you were liable for prosecution. And it was our democratic government to this day, which has undermined the whole logic of the TRC by not going ahead with the more than 100 cases that were recommended for prosecution. And as somebody asked me at a program earlier, is this about vengeance for elderly people? No, it's not about vengeance. It's about accountability. It's about all those families like the Craddock Four and the Ahmed Timos and so many other families who haven't yet had any accountability for those who cruelly took their lives, and often in the name of the state.
Advocate Ntsebeza, you wanted to say something there?
Oh yeah, no. I couldn't improve on what Father Lapsley has said. about the failure of the post-apartheid democratic government to do exactly that which they had said they would do. You will remember that the act that brought the TRC into being had given people a window of opportunity. Perpetrators on both sides of the political divide were given an opportunity to come forward and apply for amnesty if they knew that there were acts in relation to which they should apply for amnesty. Or if they applied for amnesty, they must make a full disclosure. And if they did not, the act was very clear. If they did not, either because they did not apply for amnesty or they applied for amnesty, came to the amnesty committee, gave the tissue of lies, did not qualify for amnesty, therefore, for that reason, because they were refused amnesty, then they would be prosecuted. That act was clear. And to this date, not one person has been prosecuted. And that's the betrayal. And that's what troubled the Archbishop. For the 10 years that I served as the chairman of the Desmond Tutu Peace Trust, as it then was, that was one of the things that we used to converse about. Why are these people not doing that which the Act said they must do for those who did not qualify for amnesty?
Reverend Storey, one of the things that we cannot do is to talk about the Arch without Mama Leah, because theirs was a love story that was really public, and it's still one of those that continues to inspire generations and will continue to do so for generations to come.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Never underestimate the role of Mama Leah in this amazing team that confronted an unjust and horribly oppressed South Africa. I remember when a number of clergy went on a protest march and we ended up in the cells of John Foster Square. There were only two women amongst us, and one of them was Mama Leah. And I want to tell you that going to prison with a number of other clergy is not a terribly costly thing. But going to prison alone as a woman is a very different thing. And that's the quality of courage that Leah Tutu brought to this amazing marriage. And she too, as we've heard Desmond every morning, celebrating the Eucharist every single morning. He said to me once, if I don't do that every morning, I go through the day as if I haven't brushed my teeth. This deep, deep spirituality, out of which emerged his courage and his incredible clarity of thought and ability to show us the outlines of apartheid, to be evil without a remainder, in his words, was rooted in a worship time together every morning with his spouse, with Leah, and with others. And all through their marriage, given the enormous pressures on him and the numbers of times where he had to be away in service of the South African Council of Churches or overseas, building, inviting support, mobilizing support against the apartheid regime, she was the one who held the family together. And so we owe her a tremendous debt of gratitude for the willingness to give him to the nation. And I want to say that my heart, and I'm sure all of our hearts, go out to her today in her personal loss, even as we share a national loss.
Father Lapsley, briefly, we're almost out of time. What is that one thing that you wish South Africa knew about him, which was never in the public domain?
I just wanted to add one beautiful thing about Mama Leah is she was a champion of the rights of domestic workers in South Africa. And she was a leader in that, championing the rights of the domestic workers of our country. And so we have many debts of gratitude. But I think Archbishop Desmond Tutu, I think he helped us to be better people as human beings. And he was committed to healing our woundedness. And also he believed in forgiveness, not just cheap forgiveness, but forgiveness as an act of self-liberation. And that's why he believed in it. But he also believed that with forgiveness goes a commitment to transformative justice as well for all people.
Dr. Ntsebeza, as a final question, very briefly, we have 30 seconds. How do you want him to be remembered?
I've never been one for loss of words, but I think we need to remember him as a person who correctly said God is not a Christian, that God accepts pleasing those who live by the best lights available to them that they can discern. All truth, all sense of beauty, all awareness of goodness has one source, God, who is not confined to one place, time, or people. And that coming from an atheist like me must be something.
All right. Thank you so much to you all for your time tonight. I certainly do appreciate it. I wish we had more time. That was Father Michael Lapsley, who's the founder of the Institute for Healing of Memories, of which the Art was a patron. Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, a former commissioner at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Reverend Storey, who led the South African Council of Churches with the late Archbishop. We come back.